the economic and financial world of which the city is a part has changed fundamentally, and common regulatory standards across the European single market facilitate ever-growing trade in financial services. Common supervisory standards are a check on regulatory arbitrage and good also for investor confidence in banks and financial services firms. The city is not a rootless servicer of rootless global financial interests. Well, it's not just that. It is the financial services centre of the largest single market on earth, the purpose of which is the elimination of national and competing regulatory barriers to trade. And it is also generally in everyone's interests that rules and standards across that market impose the lowest burden in complexity and cost. It is certainly in the interest of Europe as a whole that its fragmented banking sectors be knitted together into a stronger single system of prudential oversight and a banking union to stabilise and to underpin the monetary union. And I have a lot of respect, actually, for Michel, for the clarity with which he has made this case over the last few years, and as he did again this morning. And the steps that have been taken owe a lot to the commitment of the Commission. And what is the price, therefore, we must pay in Britain for this shared single market, the pooled sovereignty, and therefore the somewhat diluted influence that we have within that wider single market? In my view, the price is not as great as some people make out in Britain. The UK has never been outvoted on an important point of financial regulation in the last 5 years, except for the bonuses issue back in March, in which it was blindsided by the European Parliament, and what frankly were a set of unique circumstances. In fact, the last 5 years have seen a run of regulatory compromises in which London has leveraged its regulatory experience and its stake in the industry into acceptable British outcomes. On AFMID, on MiFID II, on EMIR, on Vickers and capital requirements in CRD4. Time and time again, people have listened to us, taken our views into account, respected our interests, and made us part of the outcome and not excluded from it. And I suspect, I certainly hope, that the twin weapons of common sense and ECJ jurisprudence will see the FTT reshaped in a much more rational and less harmful way, and that this will be good for London along with other capitals. Now, the city may not have always liked every outcome in its detail, but you know, that had more to do with the hawkish positions taken by Whitehall, more often than not, than Brussels. London's agenda over the last few years has sometimes actually seen tougher regulation of the city than the rest of the EU has contemplated, on the higher capital ratios in Vickers, as one example. So I think that Michel has always said that despite the caricature, he is not out to get the city, and frankly, the record suggests that he has been telling the truth. Which is not to say that the development of a banking union within the EU is not a really very big challenge for London. It is. And we need to grasp its dimensions and its implications for us. The UK is a minority outside the Eurozone bloc, and could well be a minority of one within a decade. Everything I know about politics and policy at that level tells me that the banking union, backed by the power and influence of the ECB, will contribute to economic union with its own rules, its own funds, its own mechanisms, and its own behaviour, including the habits of caucusing within it. The UK rightly fought hard for safeguards in this new structure and got them. But here's the point. Britain will have to keep fighting hard to build alliances that enable it to retain influence in this new distribution of power within the European Union. Talk of the top table, I know, is often a bit of a diplomatic cliche, but we do have to be at that table, and this is not beyond us. Indeed, there is a Brussels aphorism that says that in Europe you are either at the table or you are on the menu. Not leaving the table, therefore, must and has to be the government's chief priority, rather than the sort of political sort of meanderings that distract them from protecting Britain's and London's real interests. I also think that we need to recognise that there are additional factors at play with respect to the city and the EU. The strength of the Eurozone as a financial space, assuming it gets through its troubles on a durable basis, is in itself likely to pull business away from Britain, from London in time. Banks, exchanges and clearing houses supervised and backed by the strength and the power of the ECB will potentially be seen as safer, and that is likely to be reflected in relative costs of capital. This will provide an incentive to use the Eurozone over the city as a financial location. Now, this is something that no amount of political or diplomatic skill or place at the top table could change while we stay outside the euro. It is like Hong Kong complaining about the pool of mainland Chinese markets on its brief monopoly of financial business in the last few decades. There are, in other words, bigger economic and historical forces at work in Europe for us, just as there were for China on Hong Kong. London has to come to terms with this reality and plan accordingly and bring home these facts of life to the British government. Now, I'm not saying being outside the euro will be fatal for the very reasons that have made the city such an attractive place to conduct financial business for centuries. That depth of professional experience that the city has, those deep pools of capital, the legal system, and the rest, even the weather on a good day. However, and there has to be a good day, however, distancing or separating ourselves from the European Union would surely magnify this pulling away from London. And what I know for sure is that the government's current ambivalence about our whole place in the European Union doesn't help. It certainly doesn't encourage accommodation of our interests as we try to negotiate with one hand on the door pointing towards the exit. And it sucks up our political capital in the EU. And I certainly don't think that the answer, on the other hand, is to leave the EU altogether. The city's current level of business would not be sustainable if separated from the single market in financial services.